Hi, Mark Granis here with Lecture 5.5, Translation to Standard Logical Form. Translation is a difficult topic to cover by lecture because it's more art than science and it simply requires practice. It's not something that I can tell you all about in 15 minutes and just impart the knowledge and all of a sudden you'll be good at it. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. But we should talk about it, at least briefly. We should talk about why we bother translating to standard logical form if people aren't already talking that way. And then we'll talk about the guiding principle of translation to standard logical form, which will turn out to be the same as the guiding principle of all translation. I'll give you a step-by-step procedure, sort of, for translation to standard logical form. It's not quite that easy. And then we'll work through one example. Well, let's start with what standard logical form is good for. Why, after all, do we bother with this if this is not the way that people normally talk? And as you've observed, probably, it is not the way people normally talk. Well, in a word, it's clarity. By distinguishing between the quality and the quantity of each proposition, we are achieving a greater level of clarity about what is being said in any given proposition. And once we acquire that awareness of that 2x2 matrix, the two different qualities, the two different quantities that give us the A, E, I, and O propositions, our own thinking gets sharper. It's sharper when we're thinking on our own and trying to put our own ideas forth. It's also sharper when we are hearing what other people have to say. So we have a better idea of what we mean, and we also are better at perceiving what others mean. I've seen really remarkable cases, even in the Supreme Court of the United States, where the majority and the dissent in a Supreme Court case simply don't know what it is that they're disagreeing about because they're missing a key distinction, like a universal quantity versus a particular quantity. It's just a shame when you see that happening. So clearer thinking facilitates clearer communication, and clearer thinking and clearer communication are generally going to make us more persuasive, which most of us think is a benefit. In addition, it's important to know when there's a conflict and when there's not. It's very frustrating to watch two people arguing with each other when really they should be agreeing mostly, or not understanding. They go around and around in circles and don't really understand how to get to the source of the disagreement. It could also happen the other way around, where people think that they agree, but because they haven't been sufficiently clear with each other, they don't know that there's a disagreement just waiting to cause trouble later. That's hard to see. Maybe you've seen that among your friends or family. So all of these benefits require us to translate regular speech to standard logical form quite a bit. It's not something that we usually sit down and do the way we sit down and do an exercise in school, but it is something we tend to do on the fly. Ideally, once you get good at it, without even knowing that you're doing it. It's how we interpret and how we make sense of what other people are saying to us. Well, what is the guiding principle for translation? Here it is. We can change any word that we want to as long as we are capturing as accurately as possible the thoughts behind the words. That is, the concepts and the ways in which those concepts are related. Now, this should not surprise you. Since chapter 2, I've been trying to say that we don't care in logic about the words used nearly as much as we care about the ideas that the words signify. If we had mental telepathy, we wouldn't use any words at all. Language would fall out. We wouldn't worry about terms. But actually, we don't have mental telepathy, and so we need to use these words, and we're perfectly willing to change the words as long as we get to the right idea, right? Well, that turns out to be essentially the same principle that guides all kinds of translations when you go from one language to another. For example, great books. If you were translating Plato's Republic from the original Greek into English, it would make no sense to say to the translator, listen, try not to change too many words. Of course the translator is going to change it. The translator is going to change every word because that translation is being done for people who don't speak ancient Greek, right? Of course you're going to change the words. So, and it's the same thing in an international negotiation. Translators in the UN are constantly rendering all the things said into various languages so that everyone can understand what? The ideas behind the words. We change the words, we keep the ideas. Now, in translations between languages, of course, we want all the words to be changed, but we don't have to do that usually with standard logical form. In standard logical form, we have the luxury of usually keeping many of the words, if not all of the words, but we change what we must. We can change every word if we have to, as long as we keep the thoughts. But there's no reason to change things just for the sake of change. The limiting principle in all these cases is that our new words must capture the original thoughts as accurately as possible. Now, here's a challenge. What if the original thoughts contain vagueness or ambiguity? Well, in a face-to-face interaction, ideally, we can resolve this through discussion. Someone says something to you, you don't know what he or she means, you ask. Asking and answering questions is a great way to resolve the vagueness or the ambiguity, and note that that's something that you do in collaboration with the person who is the author of the statement. But what if you're looking at a text and you can't ask and get a question answered, or you're dealing with something from someone who's not there, or maybe it's a large room and you don't have the ability to, it's not a dialogue, it's a one-to-many situation like a lecture. Well, in that case, a good translation will actually preserve the ambiguity. Think about this again with the example of translating Plato's Republic. If there's a passage in Plato's work that is obscure, ambiguous, vague, it counts against the translation if the translator just resolves it, right? A good translation will preserve even that ambiguity, even the vagueness, because the vagueness is from Plato. If you take it out, then you're not getting Plato anymore. You're getting the translator. So it counts against the translation if it adds or subtracts anything that the author did not intend. All right. Here, I've called it 4 easy steps. It's a little bit tougher than that, and I don't want to suggest that you do these 4 things in order and you never move backwards. It would be more accurate to say you must do all of these 4 things and they are interdependent. But it does make sense, I think, to start by unpacking, that is, translating any figurative language to reveal its literal meaning. Because otherwise you're very unlikely to be able to identify the subject and the predicate, or to know whether you need to nounify anything or any of the other steps. You've got to know what you're dealing with in literal terms before you know how to do the rest of the translation. For example, all that glitters is not gold, the standard proverb, is not about metallurgy. It's not about gold. It's about real value as opposed to things that are only apparently valuable, right? Not all glittery things are gold. Not all things that are attractive are genuinely valuable. And so, what are we learning more about? We're learning more about attractiveness, maybe, when we identify the subject and the predicate. Maybe we're learning more about real value, but you aren't even going to be able to have that debate about what's the subject and what's the predicate here until you've identified those 2 things, which neither one of which is actually stated in the original proverb. So think about the literal meaning and be alert in this case to the multiple possibilities. Another proverb, many a true word is spoken in jest. Well, is that advice to people who have a criticism that they need to make, that maybe they can couch it in a joke and that that'll soften the blow? Maybe. Or is this advice to people who hear someone joking with them and you want to encourage them to understand that some jokes should be taken kind of seriously? Some jokes have meaning that you can learn from. Maybe that too. All right. So this is very difficult, very, very hard for me to say how you can get better at this if you're not already good at it. Read more. Read especially more literature. But it's the work of a lifetime, and you'll get better and better as you do more and more of it. What's our second step? Our second step is to identify the logical subject and predicate. The subject is what we're learning more about. The predicate is what we're learning about the subject. If we go back to the contrast with grammar, we looked at the video by Schoolhouse Rock about Mr. Morton, And in grammar, we think of the predicate as the action words, right? So Schoolhouse Rock says Mr. Morton is the subject of the sentence, and what the predicate says, he does. In logic, we would tend to say that Mr. Morton is the subject of the sentence, and what the predicate says, he is. So when we predicate something, we're either uniting two ideas or we are separating two ideas. But it's about how the subject exists, right? That's the statement that we're making in any of these propositions. All right, what's our third step? We use TW and TWI wherever necessary to nounify the subject and the predicate. You won't really know the reason for this until section 6.3, but we use TW whenever our subject or our predicate would otherwise be a verb, and we use TWI wherever our subject and our predicate would otherwise be an adjective, because we really want everything to act like a noun for reasons that you'll explain later. Finally, we identify the quality and the quantity of the proposition and place it in A, E, I, or O form. Well, that's one heck of a step. That seems like a lot to do. And it is. This is kind of where the magic happens, but it will often make you then go back and reconsider earlier steps. And so we save it for last because you kind of have to sort out some of the other stuff to get here. But don't think that you can't go back once you get here. I always think start with quality. Is the sense of the original to unite two concepts or to separate two concepts? Is it essentially affirmative or is it essentially negative? That will tell you whether you ought to be thinking about an A or an I statement or an E or an O statement. And then we have to deal with quantity. And here, inconveniently, we have to force all quantitative words into either all or no or some. So many, that's some. A few, that's some. Could there be something other than all that would be all? If it said virtually all, almost without exception, maybe there would be some times that you would want to translate as all. But a whole lot of words that are different levels of some, different degrees of some, are all going to become some. So that's one tricky area for translation. There's a rookie mistake here that you should try and avoid, and it is to overuse A propositions. The rookie tendency that I've observed in class is for everyone to try and use the A to express whatever they're being asked to translate. And that's not difficult to fight once you're aware that that's the rookie mistake. But do be aware of that and do fight it. If the statement especially is essentially negative, then you're going to have to look over to the negative side of the matrix. All right, well, let's work through one example. How about winning isn't everything? Well, the big problem here is, what do we mean literally by isn't everything? We don't mean literally that it isn't everything, because everything or anything isn't everything, right? So what do we really mean by that idiom? Maybe isn't what's most important, right? Winning isn't what's most important. That might be what this means literally. Well, if we think that's what it is, then what are we learning more about? Probably we're learning more about winning. That maybe it's not as valuable as we might have thought. But possibly we're learning more about what's most important. Maybe that's the subject. Two different possibilities. Do we need to nounify any of this? No. Winning it works as a noun, and what's most important works as a noun. We don't have to use a TW or a TWI here. But now quality and quantity. Let's think about that. First, quality. The overall sense of this is negative. We're separating somehow winning from importance. Now, if winning is the subject, then our quantity might be universal. We might be thinking something like no winning is what's most important, maybe, but probably not. Probably it's particular. Some winning is not what's most important. Like sometimes it's more important how you play the game, for example. Maybe all the time it's more important how you play the game, right? So is it particular? Is it universal? You've got a decision to make there. And that's maybe something that you'd want to discuss with someone if they made that statement in person. But what if you think the subject is what's most important? And that's possible too. Well, then our quantity is surely particular. Some of what's most important is not winning. There are important things in life other than winning, right? So several different ways to put this statement into standard logical form. And as you see, by doing this, we have uncovered different potential meanings that could all be embedded in the original statement. Does that make it harder to translate? Yes. But have we understood the statement more fully by going through the exercise and trying to figure out exactly what it means? Also, yes. So that's it for translation to standard logical form. It's enough to get you started on a lifetime of translation of what other people say. I'll be back next time with the beginning of Chapter 6.